This is an engine, this is a transmission, and this is a mess. So here's where we left off. The S54 out of the M3 transmission is off. I'm going to be moving the transmission out of the way. We are going to be doing an oil change on this, doing a transmission fluid, and then cleaning it all up, making sure that it is ready to go back into the next car. And in today's video, we're going to be removing the clutch, see what condition the old system is in, and then showing off the new system that we bought. I would also like to get this on the engine stand. I was hoping to take off the old system and then put the new one on today, but I can't put on the new system and have it on the engine stand at the same time. This has got to be completely cleaned up back here before it can go on the engine stand, and it needs to be on the engine stand because we got to flip this thing over and do some rod bearings. So I would like to start that process today, getting this off. So let's get this thing organized a little bit better, get this off, and then get this thing on the engine stand. All right, so we have the engine here on the engine stand finally. You do have to be careful putting this on there. It is rated for this kind of weight, but it does get a little bit tipsy if you're not being careful. And since these engines are kind of top heavy based on where I mounted the engine stand to, if you let this flip over by itself, it will bring the whole thing over. So it's kind of a two-person job to actually rotate the engine on the engine stand. So I do have some bad news and some good news, and then I have some cool news. Let's start with the cool news first. This engine has headers on it. So oftentimes the headers on these engines are quite expensive, $1,000 or more. Even cheap ones can be $500 or $600. So I haven't been able to decide what brand these are yet, but I can see that they are aftermarket. There are no catalytic converters on them. And then as you can see here, somebody didn't do a very good job of deleting and putting away the other O2 sensors. They're literally wire tied to the other ones. And then there is another probe sitting out here just all by itself. So that's kind of cool. And then let's go over to the bad news. So the bad news is this right here. I was hoping to reuse the flywheel, but as you can see here, it's pretty messed up. So here's the clutch. We knew we were gonna have to replace this because it was slipping really bad, and you can see it's glossed over. So we knew this was going to be bad. If this is bad, this is normally bad, but sometimes you can get away without a flywheel. So this is going to be around $500 to replace, and we were expecting it, but we were hoping that this wasn't going to be the case. So this is in the budget to replace. We were just kind of hoping to spend that $500 somewhere else. So there is the bad news. We're gonna have to replace this, the whole thing. We do have the pressure plate and the clutch here, a new one, but we don't have one of these here because we had to wait until this was opened up to see if we were gonna need a new one of these. So that is something that we are gonna have to replace. So here's the good news. This is the shifter out of the M3. Now, this is normally all one piece of leather from the top of the shifter all the way down to the boot, which is this piece right here. Now, the boot itself wasn't cracked, but the shifter itself is pretty bad. So what I did was I removed leather all the way up to where it started to get bigger. So as you can see right here, as the leather starts to get bigger, as it goes up the shift knob to the larger portion, I removed the glue by putting a flat blade down inside there without damaging the leather. And then I was able to use a razor blade and I cut all the way around this, and I was able to take the leather off of the shifter. And then we'll be able to use this down here. So as you can see here, this is actually rolled back into itself. Here's the leather that was cut off the bottom of the shifter. And what I'll end up doing is putting it onto the shifter rod itself. I will put it on like this. I'll put a zip tie on it, and then you push this onto this, and then you push it back through. And then the new shift knob, which isn't this design, it's actually a different design shift knob, this will then sit on top of it. The one we are getting is a ZHP shift knob, so it's shorter than this. It's not the weighted one, but it is shorter than this by probably a couple inches, maybe 2 inches, 1.5 inches. And then it's got a really cool brushed aluminum piece around the bottom, and that will sit nice and flush onto the top of that. Now, that's not nearly as good a news compared to the $500 you have to spend over there. I think this will save us $30 or so if you bought a cheap one off of eBay. If you bought a really nice one from BMW, I'm not sure, $100. If you bought this entire thing like this was, as you can see here, it used to have a light on it. If you replace this whole thing, I believe a cheap one of those on eBay is $100, and I don't even know, from BMW it's probably several $100s. So this was something that was cool. It doesn't necessarily counter the the replacement flywheel we're going to have to do. So I am going to remove the exhaust manifold. Now, funny enough, the exhaust manifold gaskets are cheaper for the S54 than they are for the M54. Now, the reason for that is because the M54 has 3 exhaust ports per sheet, and then there's actually a piece of metal coming up as a heat shield. You have bank 1, which is cylinders 1 through 3, and you have bank 2, which is cylinders 4 through 6. So you have to buy 2 of them, and I think they're like $25. For some reason, I was thinking they're either $25 a piece or they're $50 a piece. But either way, that's way more expensive. Because the S54 has individual ones, and they're like $2 or $3, the heat shield is not built into them. It ends up being like $20 to replace all 6 of them. So you can see that the heat shield is bolted on to the actual engine and not onto the exhaust flanges, which is cool because it was designed for this. If you want to remove your exhaust and put on a header system like this one already has on it, it's not that difficult to do. You remove your heat shield, take off your emissions, and maybe that reservoir, that expansion tank that sits over here, and you should be able to reach these without too many problems. On the M54, by the time you get around the heat shields, which aren't removable, you can't just, there's not just a couple bolts, it's actually onto the exhaust gasket. And so on the M54, when you're trying to replace your exhaust, your headers, if you're trying to do a headers, it is such a pain. It's probably less time consuming to pull the engine out to replace them, or at least disconnect your engine and lift it up so that you can reach these easier. These do sit at quite a bit of an angle, so when you're doing headers, it's quite difficult on the M54. So I do find it interesting how many things on the S54 are easier to work on or the same to work on. Obviously, I haven't done a ton of work on it, but it is very similar because I thought it was going to be very difficult. I was like, okay, this is a performance engine and it's going to be a lot more difficult. It's interesting how many things are similarly priced. So the control arms, the tie rods, whatever those are, the rag joint, the guibo, steering guibo, the flex disc, the engine mounts, all that stuff is almost the same price or very comparative in pricing. And to have the performance like this and only pay that little bit of a premium, I think is probably worth it. Now, one thing that does kill these S54s is the Vanos system. There is a gear inside there, and there's tabs on it. We're going to be opening this one up probably in the next video or something, but when you do open that up and you check it, if there are tabs missing on it, that can be like $600. I think like if you get the upgraded one, they're like $800. Well, that right there can take your S54 and put it way above what an M54 would cost. You can replace, for $800, for example, you can replace your entire coolant system, your control arms, a bunch of bushings in the front end, and your brakes and rotors for $800. Now that probably wouldn't be performance stuff, but for $800, that's a lot of money. And something like that can really kill you. So if you're able to, I know oftentimes it's not really something you can do, but if you're able to, before you buy one of these, check that. I don't think it's very difficult to get in here. I've seen a couple people get in here and they just remove a couple bolts and you can just pop the Vanos system open, which if that's true the case, then it is actually easier to get the Vanos system on the S54 than it is the M54, because the M54 is a little bit of a process. So I guess we'll find out in a later video. So we're gonna wrap it up for tonight. This has been a big success. A little bit of a setback with price, but not with any labor, which kind of goes hand in hand a little bit, but nevertheless, we are continuing on this build. Nothing has stopped us yet. We are not out of money. So stay tuned, there's a bunch of this content to come. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed today's content, hit the like button, subscribe if you are new. Leave any comments or questions down in the comment section below. I want to say thanks to all my Patreon members. If you are not a Patreon member, you can see early ad-free access of our content. It starts at just $1 a month. The link to that is in the description below. Also check out our Instagram link in the description below as well. Thanks again so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.